Hey nerds, what's up? Today I'm going to talk about some of my favorite, most well-written characters in fantasy. Now, I didn't really know how to title this because well-written can mean a lot of different things, and the list I'm doing today isn't even necessarily my favorite characters, which is interesting because obviously our favorite characters, we probably consider them to be well-written. What I mean today, specifically for well-written, is choosing characters that I think did a particular thing extremely well. Whether or not they're my favorite characters or not, I recognize the artistry in the way that the author was able to present this character in a unique way or in a particularly skilled way. I also limited myself to one character per author because there are a few authors that I could talk at length about how much I love the way they write their characters. But I will discuss 5 of some of the most well-written characters after the jump. The first person I want to talk about is Kelsier from Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. Now, Kelsier is one of my favorite characters. This is one where it overlaps. But the reason I think Kelsier is so interesting is because the first read-through, I fell in love with Kelsier like many people, and although I still like Kelsier, I was really surprised on my reread of Mistborn Era 1 how his character changed a little bit for me. I was like, I don't remember him being this bloodthirsty. I don't remember him being this violent. I don't remember him quite being this way. And it struck me that Sanderson succeeded at writing a charismatic character. One aspect of charisma can often be somebody who is charming enough to maybe put you at ease, even if they are not always the best of person or if they're involved in some sketchy things. So what's interesting to me is that I didn't notice any of that on my first read-through because I was taken in by Kelsier's charisma. But on a second read-through, when I know what is happening, I notice some of the other things about his character a little more. And I feel like that is proof that Kelsier is written very well. My runner-up for Brandon Sanderson is actually a character I wouldn't even put in my top 20 of favorite Cosmere characters, but that is Vivenna from Warbreaker. I think she's particularly well done just because my opinion changed about her so drastically over the course of the book, and again, I think that takes skill to do. The next character I want to talk about is Giselle from the First Law trilogy by J.R.R. Now, it was hard for me to pick a J.R.R. character because I do think Abercrombie does characters so well, but Giselle in particular, even though he is not my favorite character, I think Abercrombie did such a good job of making a sexist character without making a sexist book. I talk about that a lot. I've gotten a lot of criticism when I call a book sexist. People will tell me, well, that's what the author intended. And sometimes that may be true and it's hard to see through it. Abercrombie does an extremely deft job of making Giselle very sexist, very womanizing, but very clear vision of that is that character and not the book's view as a whole. And because of that, I appreciate Giselle as a character quite a bit. I also think it's interesting that Abercrombie was able to make him seem like the worst character, even though technically he has the moral high ground. I just think he was done very well. Additionally, he's another character where my opinion changes on him slowly throughout the course of the novels. Again, I think it takes a skilled author to have a reader's opinion change on a character in a natural and fluent way. My runner-up for Joe Abercrombie would be Sandan Glokta. He gets talked about a lot more, but the one thing I'll say about Glokta is I'm impressed that Abercrombie was able to make a torturer character not come off as edgelord. Nothing comes off edgy about Glokta. He is an interesting person for as dark as he is. The third character I want to talk about is Gia from the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I think Gia is a great example of a realistic, strong female character in a world that is sexist or a world that won't give her the time of day in the beginning. I've talked a lot about how people think I'm picky. I talk a lot about how people trying to be feminist goes overboard a lot and makes these cookie cutter characters with no flaws, as we talked about in my Mary Sue video. And there's the other side of it where they're, damsels in distress constantly. There's this nice mark of characters that are real, and that's what I talked about, just well-written characters, and Gia is one of them. She undergoes a lot of changes throughout the series, and the reader's opinion will change, and what I think is so interesting is that Liu was able to make a complex enough character that I feel like I could discuss Gia with several people, and we all wouldn't agree with how we felt about her. And I think that shows that it is a very realistic portrayal of somebody like her in power, and I really appreciated it. Okay, these next two might be a little controversial, I don't know. Again, I'm talking about well-written in a particular way. The next character I think about is Bilbo Baggins from The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I think you need a little bit of my history with reading Lord of the Rings to understand this one. Although I watched the movies growing up and loved them, I did not actually end up reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings until about 2017, so it was decently recent. And I fell in love with both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And one thing I noticed about The Hobbit is that I think it does the reluctant hero so well. Now, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien really popularized so many of the tropes we're used to, so Bilbo was probably one of the original reluctant heroes. But since I had read so many other reluctant heroes before I actually read The Hobbit, I couldn't believe how fresh it felt. I'm like, oh, this is how it is when it's done right. Not that I hate a reluctant hero, I just find that it can often bog down a story, and it's hard to get a rhythm going when you want your character to resist against the adventure, but you need to go and have the plot and adventure. And somehow the way Tolkien deftly threads that with Bilbo just really captured me. It's funny, it's heartwarming, he is reluctant, but it doesn't bog down the story, and I think it's just a great example of how to do a reluctant hero correctly. And finally, my last pick is Ender from Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. The reason I picked this one is I do love an overly super smart, talented character. I fell in love with Artemis Fowl as a kid, and I know some of that bugs some people, I like it, but it does have to be done well to not fall into a Mary Sue category or to be boring. And I think Ender's Game as a whole does that very interestingly with Ender. I really fell in love and started to sympathize with Ender as a character because, again, Orson Scott Card doesn't make this direct cutoff between more intelligence means less empathy, stupider means more empathy. There are times where Ender lacks empathy and is cold, but there's also times where he's a deep feeler. And this complexity that he gave Ender as a super intelligent character, I think gets missed a lot, and I really appreciated it. And this is shown even more when he writes Ender's Shadow and has another super intelligent character that feels very, very different from Ender as a character. And I think that nuance there is one of the reasons that Ender's Game worked really well for me as a book and is still a series that gets talked about a lot today. Okay, those were 5 characters I think are particularly well written for specific reasons. Interestingly enough, only one of them is my favorite character. So again, this is not saying other characters aren't well written. I just think they show some interesting skill sets. I'd love to know which characters blew you away as being particularly well written, whether they were well written for a specific purpose or you just thought overall they really resonated with you. I'd love to hear about them. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time.